Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Catheta webinar. We are coming to you live on January 8th, 2026. If anybody is an NLC webinar first timer in the room, our Catheta webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about energy audit capacity building from your instructors, Mike Stevenson and Stephanie Bostwick. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist at the Native Learning Center. I'm a little under the weather today, so I'm going to stay off camera, but we're also thrilled that you could tune in for today's webinar with us. If you could follow the disclaimer as I read aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here. So this is just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Moving forward, if you want to revisit the recording of this webinar or explore any of our other recorded webinars that we have on our learning platform, you can find that in the courses section here on the platform. And if you choose to join a webinar in the future, and we sure hope you do, you can find that you'll just log in like you did today and you'll join by clicking on that green banner at the top of the screen. We do ask that you join with listen-only capabilities because we are recording the webinar. So when you join with your mic on, it just leads to a lot of audio feedback. And if you find that your sound is coming out of the wrong device, maybe you're trying to use your earbuds, maybe you're trying to use a Bluetooth speaker, whatever the case might be, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you might have a headset icon instead of a telephone one like I have, but just know that if you click on that, you will be able to pull up a list of your speaker devices and you can select the proper audio output. Even though we ask you to join on mute for the sake of the recording, we do still, of course, want to encourage class participation. We want to know your questions, we want to know your comments, and we'll rely primarily on the public chat for that. If you don't yet have it open, you can go over to the messages column and click on public chat. That opens up a chat between you, the instructors, and me, the NLC staff. If you have any questions or comments, you'll just come down here to where it says send message to public chat, type in whatever you'd like to say or ask, and then hit enter, or you can click on that little paper airplane and it'll send it in. If you have any tech support issues that I can help you try to navigate through, you could let me know that in the chat as well. But then just any questions or comments you have throughout the throughout the course of the webinar. And if you feel like maybe we missed something you asked along the way, you can always use that hand raise feature that you can find down in the bottom right corner of your screen. If you did join with your mic unmuted, if you could please just mute it by clicking on the little microphone icon. We do want to have you guys start getting active in the chat before we get going, if you don't mind. You could take a moment to introduce yourself, let us know your name, where you're joining from. It's always fun to see all the different tribal nations that are represented on the webinar. Your work or your role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation, if you have one. You might be a tribal employee and you don't have your own tribal affiliation. That is okay too. You are also welcome, not to fear. All right, y'all, I just have a quick final warning while you're introducing yourselves in the chat. Do your best to avoid clicking on the red menu panel that's all the way to the left side of your screen. You might not have it expanded like I have. You might just see the little icons. But it doesn't ask you first if you want to leave the webinar. Instead, it will just pull you immediately out and it will take you to what you selected on the menu. You can always just rejoin by clicking on that green banner once again, but it can be a little jarring. So I just want to give you guys a heads up. All right, and while y'all are introducing yourselves in the chat, it's with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructors for today, Mike Stevenson and Stephanie Bostwick. And Stephanie, I have made you presenter now.
Awesome, thanks, Brooke. So Mike and I will go ahead and get started with intros and then we'll dive into the content. So Oki Niksugoax Nistu Natanigo Ikutsi Aniaki Nim Tutu Amskapi Bigani. Hello, friends and relatives. My name's Stephanie Bostwick. My tribal name is Red Shawl Woman and I'm Blackfeet. I'm an aerospace engineer by trade and worked in industry for several years and then actually got into higher education where I started an engineering program most recently at Northwest Indian College, focused on renewable energy and energy sovereignty for tribes. And in doing that work, did a lot of workforce development around energy audits, solar installations, microgrid feasibility and development. And then when I left the college, was fortunate enough to get hired on by the Department of Energy's Office of Indian Energy, where I was the Tribal Colleges and Universities coordinator for all TCUs. And that's where I met my colleague Mike, and we started piloting some of the work we're going to talk about today with energy audits in partnership with tribal colleges and universities. We've both now left the Department of Energy and have our own companies, but we offer these trainings with the hopes that we can build up the workforce and capacity in Indian country related to energy projects. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Mike to give his intro.
Thanks, Steph. Hi, everybody. And first and foremost, I want to let you guys know, so Steph and I are at a resilient housing conference at Fort McDowell, and I feel like the universe knew we were doing a webinar at noon, so we've got vacuums running inside the hotel, some weed eating going on outside, and so I apologize if there's any background noise that interferes today. But my name is Mike Stevenson. I am an electrical engineer. I've had the very good fortune of working with tribes across the lower 48 in Alaska for about the last dozen years as they pursued their vision for what energy development looked like for them. I founded Resilient Energy Solutions about a year ago when I left the federal government. When I was with the feds, I was with Department of Energy, Office of Indian Energy, and oversaw all of the technical assistance the office provided to tribes across the lower 48 in Alaska. I did that for about 5.5 years, and prior to joining DOE for almost 7 years, I was with a small tribal energy office that many of you might be familiar with in the Department of Interior, the Division of Energy and Mineral Development, primarily working with grants and technical assistance to assist tribes as they pursued microgrid formation activities and tribal utility formation. And so, again, I know I said it on Tuesday, but we are incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to partner with the Seminole Native Learning Center, with Brooke and Georgette and their amazing team. They dedicated 4 different webinars to this series on energy-related capacity building. Today is the second of which, and the same ground rules apply as the one we had on Tuesday. You know, Steph and I are used to being in the room with you when we're providing trainings and able to have some visual cues for feedback. We're very grateful to present this information via this webinar format, and we'll definitely pause for questions throughout the material and have some time at the end. But we really encourage and appreciate discussion. So I say that to say, please don't hesitate to interrupt us, and we'll be mindful to keep our eyes on the chat. And if you have a question, please don't hesitate to jump in, because we would much prefer to have a discussion on some of this content versus just presenting it. Thank you very much and appreciate your time today.
All right, so we'll go ahead and dive into the content here. This is just a quick agenda about everything we'll be covering today. So I'll kind of jump into an overview here and talk through a little more high level of what we'll be discussing with you all. So just as a quick overview, energy auditing and the work related to it can offer some really great opportunities for employment or enhancing your current workers' skills on the reservation. You know, the reason Mike and I got into this work that we do is to really do workforce development and capacity building in Indian country. So, you know, we're not those consultants that want to come in and do the work for you. We want to help you train your folks to do work and create those employment opportunities. So that the money's staying local and you're able to provide really good paying work to everybody. As a whole, with energy auditing, we'll kind of go through some of the benefits of it. But, you know, the biggest one is that we're lowering bills for residents and making housing more affordable for folks just by reducing that consumption. But, you know, that also goes with our values of, you know, not taking more than we need and really thinking about what our usage is. And at the end, we'll talk through some resources that are available, including, you know, what we can offer you all. But we're really going to dive into the meat of our energy audit content so you all can understand what happens during that process and the impacts of it. So to start with, again, we're creating employment opportunities, not only with the energy auditing, but the results of the energy audit can lead to work in doing air sealing of homes and weatherization, which can be, the same folks doing the audits or other folks. But there are also, we're going to talk through, some different upgrades that you can do related to heat pumps, and water heaters that you can install. So those are other side jobs for folks. So there's a lot around energy efficiency and weatherization that can create really good, steady employment for folks. So we'll talk through more of that. And again, being able to employ your own people when you're doing energy projects just really helps move the community toward energy sovereignty, because your folks are more educated about what's going on and able to really drive the direction of the decisions that are being made and the work that's being done. So I'm going to talk kind of at a high level of the impacts. Again, we'll dive into the meat of what auditing looks like, but just to really give you a sense of the impact that it's having. I will say, we've done a lot of trainings with housing authorities and with tribal colleges, and the housing units we've gone into, most of them have just been remodeled, and the housing workers are doing a great job going through and updating and upgrading things. So these audits aren't finding big findings, but there are little things that you can catch that make big impacts still. And so we'll talk through some of that. Just in this photo here, you'll see a pressure pan test. And that's something that we use to test how well a fan is working. So bathroom fans, for example, typically are rated at around 100 cubic feet per minute of air that they're pulling out of the room. And this simple test, and it's a pretty inexpensive device, can actually tell you what that fan flow is. And we were recently in a housing unit that had been really well sealed up and insulated, and we got into the bathroom and measured the fan, and it was only pulling 25 cubic feet per minute. And that fan motor had just been replaced. And so everybody just sort of assumed, hey, this fan is working properly and doing its job. But when we talked to folks more, they were having a mold problem because the fans weren't pulling enough of that moist air out of the home. So even in a case where, we saw a really well sealed home, we came in and were able to say, hey, this fan's not working, the way it's supposed to, and that's actually still having a big impact. So what we'll talk through about the audit process and what we look for and how we use these tools, we'll show you that even, when the workers are trained to do a really great job, this can catch things here and there that might seem small, but still have a really big impact. So just, to talk energy efficiency first, it's interesting because, we've done a lot of work in Indian country, and, you see folks who are going after solar installation grants, which is great. But if you're not tackling energy efficiency first, you're putting in a lot more energy generation to compensate for, not taking care of the energy efficiency first. But just, for folks who are new to energy, a kilowatt hour is a unit of energy that the utility company bills you for. So anybody who looks at their utility bill, you're going to see your usage measured in kilowatt hours and billed in kilowatt hours. And depending on where you are in the country, you might be paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour. You might be paying over $1 per kilowatt hour. But what we always say is the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you don't use. That's free no matter what your rate you're paying is. So it's really important to think about energy efficiency first before we're, going out and tackling things again like energy generation. And an audit can really help you catch some big impacts that you can make on the housing to decrease your overall usage. So on this chart that you see here, this is really to show that across the U.S., the bulk of energy used in a home, it says here air conditioning, and that's really heating and cooling. So typically 50% or more of your household energy use is your heating and cooling system. So, when we talk recommendations about, what upgrades people can make, typically, things like we'll go into heat pumps or mini splits as a heating and cooling device. Things like that are just higher efficiency for heating and cooling can really make a big impact. You'll see here that water heating is the second biggest source of energy usage in a home. So that's another good place to tackle. Similar to the heat pump, there are actually these high efficiency water heaters available now that are called heat pump water heaters. They're using a similar technology to the mini split that's used for heating and cooling, and they're actually using that extra efficiency to heat your water and reduce your consumption. So when we talk about replacing appliances in a home, we really, those are the top two. Those are your two biggest energy consumption areas. So those are really the things to think about your investments in. Everything else you see there, your refrigeration, your washer, dryer, your TVs, your computers, those are all pretty low consumption. So those aren't really things to focus on when you're thinking about really impacting your bill. And we'll get into that a little more in the coming slides. But that last bullet there talks about sealing air gaps. And again, as we talk through the audit process, that's something you can really identify with an energy audit, is doing air sealing and weatherization to get that house really tight, and just preventing that leakage is really going to minimize your energy usage, even if you don't do any appliance upgrades, to your heating, cooling, or water heating. So again, the audits are a really good place to start when we're thinking about reducing energy usage. Any questions so far? Anything? Feel free to type in the chat as we're talking too. We're happy to take questions as we go. So again, your other appliances in your home are not a big chunk of your consumption overall. You'll see that, appliances these days have these Energy Star ratings, meaning they're more efficient than your old appliances. But what we recommend is that you don't actually look into upgrading any of these appliances until they fail, just because the cost of the appliance is not going to be offset by the savings that you see from that appliance. So you'll probably be paying more for a new dishwasher than you would be saving in, that energy efficiency that it provides. So again, if you focus on the heating and cooling and the water heating, you will see those savings because those are such a high percentage of your energy load. But with these other appliances, we kind of just say, once your dishwasher fails, then go look for an Energy Star one, and it'll be a little more efficient than what you had before. But don't go, spending your money on that unless you happen to have a rebate that's, completely paying for your appliance. By all means, get a new shiny dishwasher, but not the focus here. So I kind of talked about this with heating and cooling, the mini splits, or, some people know them as heat pumps. So that's the unit you see there on the right. That's the actual heat pump. And then there's a head unit in the house that provides heating and cooling for the home. Here you see a traditional air conditioning unit. These mini splits provide both heating and cooling, which is really nice because in a lot of areas, folks only have heating and don't have cooling. And these provide both, but just much higher efficiency than what you would see with an air conditioning unit. So you're not going to be seeing that energy consumption that you would have with a traditional air conditioning unit. These are very efficient. They're ductless, so they're a lot easier to maintain, than an HVAC system, a traditional one. And so this is something we're working with a lot of folks on, to tackle that heating and cooling problem, because again, if that's 50% or more of your load, that's something you can really see some savings with.
And real quick, Steph, sorry to jump in. And we're just touching on heat pumps on this one for the energy auditing, but we do have a full heat pump webinar on Tuesday, January 20th. Heat pump deployment, I think, is going to be really big in Indian country in the next few years, particularly under this administration.
Thanks, Mike. And apologies if you can hear the noise going on outside. There's yard work happening. Good times. So to jump back in, summary of the impacts that we can have with energy auditing. Again, the first is just training up your local workforce, be that your housing authority folks, your TARO workers, your local contractors. If you have a tribal college and have some workforce programming. Again, the auditing is a really good activity for folks, as well as the air sealing and weatherization. Completely separate business would be, installation of those heat pumps or even the water heaters. So there's work for days. A lot of the houses, whether they're housing units or just individual homeowner units, really need some good air sealing and weatherization, and probably some of these upgrades as well. So, you can create really steady work for folks that will be consistent long-term and, well-paying, but also it's making those impacts still for your residents where you're reducing their consumption and reducing their bills. That can increase comfort if you've got, elder housing that people don't have cooling in, things like that. So, along with these upgrades comes those decreased costs for folks as well as an increased comfort. And then, I kind of touched on it a little bit, but, if you're decreasing your consumption, you're decreasing that demand for things. If you're looking at renewable energy like solar, if you go in there and tackle your energy efficiency first, you're not having to put as big of a solar array on a home because you're not compensating for a leaky home anymore. You're coming in and doing this audit first and making those improvements so that the usage overall is decreased, and then, put solar on 2 homes instead of 1, because you've had those efficiency measures put into place. So the impacts of this can be really big. And you'll see there at the end, we're going to talk through collecting the data and, using that data if you want to apply for grants to do this work. It's really easy data to collect. And if you're going in there and saying, we've audited this home and here now we've air sealed it, now we're auditing it again, those numbers are going to show that decreased consumption, and those are going to help you get grants to do the audits, to do the weatherization and air sealing, to do the heat pump installations. So this is a great way to collect that data and then get more funding to cover the work that you're doing. I agree, John. The costs associated can definitely deter folks. So state by state, it's going to vary. In some places, there are really good state level or utility level rebates that you can get for installation of heat pumps to offset the cost. But this is also something that we'll touch on at the end, but I'll say it here as well, that right now in the federal funding environment, there is not any funding that we know of that's going to be available for renewable energy. There's still kind of an ongoing debate there, but so far it's kind of off the table. But this is something where you can get federal funding to do, that BIA funding Mike talked about. You can do the feasibility studies for the heat pump installations. And then what we think, it seems that the Office of Indian Energy will be able to support work like this as well for deployment. So there are funding opportunities available for this to offset the costs. The costs have come down per unit, and so there are some units that are a lot more affordable than they used to be, but certainly, worth looking into the federal funding opportunities to offset the cost as well as local rebates. That answer your question, John? All right, so I'm going to hand this off to Mike, and he's going to jump into energy auditing.
Thanks, Steph. And John, I know we're going to try and dig into that a little bit more on the Tuesday, January 20th webinar. If for some reason you can't make it, Steph and I would be happy to jump on a call. We've found, it varies by location, as many funding opportunities do. Bonneville has significant rebates, a lot of the utilities, but cooperatives in WAPA probably less so, and we'll have to get more creative. Okay, folks, so as we dive into the building science fundamentals and get into the really what we're doing and why we're doing it as it pertains to energy auditing, just want to make a quick note that while this training is well suited for housing authorities, it's also very relevant and functional for utility staff, TCUs, TARO with local contractors. It really just ultimately depends on which program or staff will be conducting the audits on residents' homes post-training. So in this section, we're going to go through why auditing is necessary, discussing the issues we typically identify by conducting the audits, and ultimately how and why it makes a difference for people lowering their energy bills. The picture on this slide was from a training we conducted in partnership with Tribal Energy Alternatives as part of their IBT solar training at Blackfeet Community College in June of last year. Next slide, please, Steph. So the two main factors we're assessing when we're conducting an audit are the thermal boundary and the air boundary. The thermal boundary limits heat flow between the inside and outside. Thermal boundaries are usually easy to identify visually, as insulation is typically used to create the thermal boundary. We can usually spot missing insulation, or as we'll see later in the presentation, we can detect missing insulation in walls utilizing the thermal camera when the blower door is operating. But I don't think people fully appreciate always that missing insulation definitely contributes to increased energy costs. An incredibly small void in insulation results in major reductions in the overall insulation level. It's a bit extreme, but you can kind of think of it like a hole in your tire. Your tire as a whole is very ineffective with a small hole in it, and insulation really works the same way. Air really rushes through any voids in the insulation. And another area where this is concerning is, air carries moisture, and so that causes condensation, which can lead to mold and a lot of other air quality issues that we see impacting health, and can also lead to structural damage. And so we have a picture, a few slides upcoming, where we'll highlight how impactful the missing insulation can be. Next slide, Steph, please. And then this is just a picture that shows blow-in insulation in an attic. And so in this example, this is potentially an example of what good looks like for a thermal boundary. We can't tell by this picture how deep the insulation is, and that's going to be important depending on what type of climate the home is in. Different climates require different levels of insulation. But as far as we can tell from this picture, this is a well done thermal boundary. We don't want to see the blow-in insulation piled up in one corner and bare spots in any places. So we also want to take into account the air barrier, and the air barrier is much harder to identify, and this limits airflow between the inside and the outside of the conditioned space. And so by conditioned space, I mean the living areas. If it's a crawl space or you've got an attic, unless that attic is used as living space, we don't want that insulated. Those are unconditioned spaces, and we want the air barrier and the thermal barrier to be intact, just surrounding the living space in the home where our heat is going, and if you have air conditioning, where the cooling is going in the summertime. And also additional air barriers might be necessary. An example of this would be like a vapor barrier over dirt in a crawl space. But really, it's very difficult to visually find any holes in the air barrier. And that's why we use the blower door to achieve this. And we'll cover that in a lot greater detail here in the next few minutes. So this graphic just shows common areas where the air barrier can fail. I think the most common places we discover when using the blower door is around windows and electrical chases and recessed can lights. One of the most common issues we discover, though, is lack of insulation and weather stripping on attic access panels. And it's easy to understand why it happens, you know, in places, it's particularly on that last picture we showed with the blow-in insulation. The first time somebody goes to lift that hatch, there's a pressure difference between the attic and the inside of the house. All that blow-in insulation makes a mess. It falls all over them, so they tip it to the side. They clean the area around it, so the next time they go in there, it doesn't blow in. Well, unbeknownst to them, they've just created an absolute thermal highway for that conditioned air to go up to the roof. And like we talked about with the tire reference, you know, that's not even a small hole, that's a large hole. And it's amazing the impact it has on heating bills by having an uninsulated attic access hatch. And we find that incredibly often. And it's really, with that too, you know, it's a very, and many of these they're very easy issues to remedy, and they're very low cost to fix, and it makes a really big difference in what people are paying monthly in their heating and cooling bills. And you simply don't know what you don't know, and that's what this training sheds light on. So I mentioned change in temperature impacts how air flows. So higher temperature air is higher pressure than low temperature air. And so if it's 20 degrees outside and your thermostat's set to 70 degrees, the indoor air pressure is much higher than the outside air. And so air will escape out of your home through any of these holes we discover. And, you know, if it's even colder, that pressure difference is even greater. So this is always working against us. If it's incredibly hot outside, and you happen to have air conditioning, and typically a home is cooler than the outside with insulation, even without air conditioning, but the hot air from the outside is going to go through into your house. And so again, the larger that temperature swing, so on the hottest and coldest days, it's even magnified these issues, and it makes your system work even harder to heat or cool the space. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, I saw the second one, not the first one. My messaging is an update and I had to hit the button. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think, again, we'll touch on that some more probably in the heat pumps as well. But I think movement of air is huge. You know, I've never actually done a study on this with someone to see, but we've talked about it a lot with folks, primarily in like the Pacific Northwest, where it's all electric heat, and they have these baseboard heaters that are relying on conduction to move the air. You know, I think if you set a fan up across that to get the air moving along those baseboard heaters, you would save tremendously. Helping the air move is certainly a way that helps your appliances, your heating appliances or cooling appliances work more efficiently. I think it's naturally going to want to rise. I mean, but again, I think circulating the air in general is typically a positive thing. Did I answer that well enough for you, John? Hang on, Steph, go back real quick. And so again, you know, I touched on it earlier. I don't know if this graphic, you can't probably see it incredibly well, but you see that the attic is reverse, and that goes to what I was talking to earlier. We don't want the attic to be insulated, so the insulation should run along the top of the living space. And that also plays into our favor for helping discover some really easy ways to identify post-training, and that's a little bit on the next slide. And so this slide shows really the external reality of the thermal and air barrier failing. You know, this graphic here illustrates an improperly insulated recessed light fixture as the cause, and that's a very common culprit. But again, even more often, this happens from lack of proper insulation and air sealing on the attic access panel. And, you know, a recent example, I'm from the Denver area, and it's been a very mild winter so far. I think it's only snowed once, but it finally got cold for a few days a couple of weeks ago, and we had a good frost on our rooftops in my neighborhood. And as I was driving down my street, I noticed there was one of my neighbor's houses. There's no frost on a section of their roof, and even more specifically, I could identify that they were missing 3 entire rectangles of insulation. I could see bare spot on the roof, a perfect rectangle. I could see where the rafter was running, and then 2 more of them. And I don't know if you've heard this, but a snowy roof is a well-insulated home, and these cause problems aside from just a higher energy bill. This causes, as the snow melts where the warm spot is, it refreezes near the gutters, and that causes ice dams, and that can drastically shorten the lifespan of the roof, and also continue to contribute to mold and impact air quality. And again, I think we have a picture near the end of the presentation showing how you can properly insulate these attic hatches, but very easy, low-cost fixes. And oftentimes, certainly we get into homes where they need window updating and some appliances, and there's more expensive fixes. But most frequently, these are very easy, low-cost fixes that not only save money on energy bills, but prevent structural and other costly and health issues. Next slide, please, Steph. One thing to consider too is particularly as it impacts indoor air quality, is we can air seal too well, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but we want to make sure that we're closing all infiltration and exfiltration points, and that's the gaps where air's either coming in the summertime when you're trying to keep your house cool, or that warm air that you're spending a lot of money on to keep warm in your home is leaving, going out in the winter time. And so we want to make sure all those gaps are covered, and we're controlling how much the air is circulating with ventilation or exhaust fans. Is there any questions on any of that so far? Well, I think that depends. I don't know that there's a bad time to really have the whole house fan on. I don't know that there's, I think, again, and I apologize, we're feeding into the one for Tuesday the 20th a bit, but, I think there's some really benefits to these air source heat pumps we're finding. Not only are they relatively easy to install, and it's a tremendous workforce development opportunity in any country, but these fans are incredibly efficient. Typically in 24 hours of operation, they use the same amount of energy a traditional air conditioner uses in 2 or 3. And the key to success with those is in those internal head units, they have, decent sized fans, but they're relatively small. And that's kind of the limiting factor is, the manufacturer will only list like one head unit to cover 300 square feet or 200 square feet. It varies. But what we found in talking with folks, and we were recently doing a training with a housing authority in California, and one of their employees had mentioned that she has a head unit in her bedroom, and she puts a simple box fan outside of her door to help draw the air out of her bedroom, and very efficiently, very effectively heats and cools her home with one head unit. And so, another thing with these is they tend to be really low maintenance. People are able to install them and kind of forget about them, and so I think that for both air quality, assuming that there's not mold issues present, and that's everything's been remedied, having fan and circulating the air is typically a pretty positive thing. So I think, John, I don't know the answer to the question on the second piece of that. I think that, you know, they both could be effective for beneficial to indoor air quality. But what we typically suggest with the heat pumps is leaving the legacy heating and cooling in place. You can simply add these. And what it takes is homeowner education to make sure that they're able to operate both pieces of equipment effectively and understand what the thermostats could be set to minimize the electricity usage. But particularly, you know, as it comes to folks that are fortunate enough to have natural gas ducted heating, you know, we typically advise to leave that because you can get mini splits that attach to the ducted system, but to have basically diversify your ability to heat your home and still maintain those base load systems and just add the heat pump as an additive resource. Great questions. Thank you all. So how do we find these holes in the air barrier? So that's when we utilize a blower door to depressurize a house, and it forces air to come through these gaps. It really doesn't take a lot of pressure to accomplish this. We reduce the pressure to 50 pascals. Pascal is just a unit for pressure, but essentially what it really does is we are creating a condition equivalent to a 20-mile-an-hour wind blowing on each of the external walls at once. And it makes it much easier for us to identify places where air is coming into the home. Next slide, please, Steph. So we're going to get into a little bit more of the diagnostic tools and actually how we find these holes and what we utilize to conduct the test. This slide is a picture of a training we did with workforce development students at Ilisavik College in Barrow, Alaska, Uktiavik, with our friend Connor from Cold Climate Housing Research Center. We did this training, probably a year and a half or so ago before Steph and I left the feds. Next slide, please. So combustion safety testing. I could go on and on about combustion safety, and I won't today, but we spend a good deal of time on this in the training. You know, it's a component of auditing. It's not needed everywhere. If you only have electric appliances, there's no need for the combustion safety testing. But it is a component where there are natural gas or propane heaters or appliances in the home. You know, this picture shows an older natural gas furnace. Most of the housing units we've trained at have newer, more efficient furnaces where the gas exhaust is actually mounted to the top of the furnace. It's screwed in place. I don't know if any of you are familiar, if you've ever seen the older style furnaces or water heaters where there's a flue on top and there's about a 2 or 3 inch gap in between. And that's relying on, again, that temperature difference. You've got the hot gas coming out of the furnace or the water heater, and it's relying on it to go straight up through that flue, and it's a natural draft effect, it's called, to take it straight up out through the roof of your house and exit to the environment. But that can backdraft, and that can backdraft back down and you know, potentially cause carbon monoxide poisoning. Excuse me. Carbon monoxide is a byproduct of incomplete combustion. And so incomplete combustion basically means that the air to fuel mixture is not correct. And, you know, when it comes to the furnaces in particular, you know, burners can certainly fail, but really the leading culprit is dirty filters. You know, you've got residents that might not even know they have a furnace filter, and you pull this thing out and it looks like a dryer vent full of lint, you know, and so it's not getting proper airflow in. You've got too much fuel exiting through the exhaust. that's incomplete combustion, and it leads to carbon monoxide issues. Next slide, please, Steph. Much more common appliance that we test is a propane or natural gas oven. Again, I think most people don't really realize this, but a gas oven, it exhausts right onto the cooktop, right behind the burners when it's warming up. When you first turn on an oven, it's essentially dumping carbon monoxide right there in your face if you're standing there, but right into the house until it warms up. And then once it warms up, it does have complete combustion. Then it's combusting that gas efficiently once everything's warmed up. But we don't even test it for the first 5 minutes because it takes that long for it to where the carbon monoxide levels drop to where we can actually test it. And we do test at the 5-minute mark and definitely recommend the appliance be repaired or replaced if it outputs more carbon monoxide than the allowable level. But this again is one of many parts in the training where we talk to the trainees about the importance of having conversations with the homeowner while they're doing the audit and really educate them about some of these potential dangers that they impose. There are times when it gets incredibly cold and people are in absolute dire straits, and they might want to open the oven to help heat their home, absolutely unaware of the danger this presents.
All right, so I kind of alluded to this one previously, but again, there's a pressure pan test that we can do to test our fans to make sure that they're operating according to whatever their rating is. So again, typically with a bathroom fan, they're rated at 100 cubic feet per minute. This is a great way to go in and just test that fan and make sure it's doing what it needs to do. And again, the whole reason that we have ventilation, right, whether it be for your cooktop or for your bathroom, you're trying to get rid of that moisture, right? If you're boiling water on the stove, you want to get that moisture out of the air. You don't want to trap that moisture in the home because you're going to have mold issues from that. Same with your bathroom fan, you're trying to evacuate that moisture so that you're not having, condensation and mold issues. So this is a great way to identify it. And again, I think at least half of the homes that we've tested that have been renovated on different reservations with different housing authorities, we've caught a lot of bathroom fans that are not operating to what they're supposed to be, what they're rated at. So this is a great test that we do as part of the audit to really, make sure that we've got that ventilation, because as Mike talked about before, we want to be the ones controlling the airflow and the ventilation in the house. And so if we're sealing up all the holes, we're controlling that ventilation by having different HVAC systems in place, including these fans that are pulling air out of the home and different ways of bringing air into the home. So this is just a really good test to make sure everything's working appropriately. And you can save a lot of remediation. If you're having mold issues and then you catch that the bathroom fans aren't operating appropriately, this just really helps with that. Yes, John. So that's a good question. So there are different ways that you can test for mold. We go into a lot more detail on that when we work with housing authorities. Most already have some mold remediation, but there are mold remediation kits that you can get at your local hardware store that can help with that. I would say it depends how bad the mold is, what your mitigation is going to look like. There are definitely cases where, the moisture in the mold is basically, so bad that you have to replace the drywall. So I've seen cases, where the drywall is completely saturated, and you definitely are going to need to remove that and replace it. What's really nice is for bathroom areas, there is a special drywall that you can put in that's more mold resistant. When you're at the hardware store looking, it's a green color instead of the regular white drywall. But that can be really helpful in just minimizing the mold in a space that's got moisture. But yeah, it's going to be situational, and that's where the auditor is going to have to really look at, the presence of the mold and figure out how widespread it is and how best to mitigate it. But again, we leave that up to the auditors and the homeowners. We're not making recommendations for folks, but people do need to, if you've got a housing authority or you've got local contractors doing the work, absolutely make sure that they've got a process in place to measure and look for and then mitigate as necessary. Question.
Yeah, we're quite careful to make sure that, because we teach, identification of lead, mold, asbestos, and radon is becoming more prevalent. But absolutely follow, we were very careful not to make sure we're not superseding any sort of policies already in place by the tribe or their housing authority. And thanks, Steph, for bringing up the exhaust fan. I neglected to talk about that with the oven too. That's critical. That's why those appliances are there, to help educate the homeowner to make sure that they're turning the fan on anytime they're operating the oven. I think a lot of people just think that that's for if you're boiling water on the cooktop and to make sure that you get the steam or whatever out of the way. But it's really critical to have that fan running when the oven's going. And so this slide, we have really powerful tools at our disposal anymore. These thermal cameras are really incredible tools for us. When we have the blower door operating, it's enough pressure that you run your hand past an outlet and you can feel the draft. And you can feel the draft by the window, depending on how leaky it is. But these thermal cameras, they let us see through walls. They self-calibrate to temperature. And so it used to be much easier to conduct audits when it's really hot outside or really cold inside, because you could feel the draft much easier that way. And now these thermal cameras, they will recalibrate themselves. So even if it's, if it happens to be 72 outside and 70 inside, it still lights up, blue and red really bright and helps us identify leakage. And we're able to perform audits when it's much more comfortable for the homeowner too, right? Who wants us coming into their house, having their front door wide open for a couple of minutes while we're trying to set up this blower door? And, we just have really powerful tools at our disposal. And so when the blower door is running, it brings that cold air from the attic down to be able to see, in this example that we have shown here, it helps us identify missing insulation in the thermal barrier. Drop soffits where cabinets are hung are super frequent to find areas that need better insulation. And it's just, again, very powerful tool we have at our disposal anymore to conduct these audits. And this slide just shows an exterior picture of a blower door in place. And, we spend quite a bit of time in the training. The one thing, we want to make sure everybody knows how to safely conduct an audit. We want to make sure that they're safe in terms of personal protective equipment. They understand the hazards in terms of the asbestos, mold in particular. But we spend quite a bit of time. We really want to make sure they understand why we're doing what we're doing, how they utilize the equipment, why is the equipment giving us this information? How do we utilize it? What's it really telling us? And that they're very comfortable setting up, breaking down, and really get a lot of hands-on training. And so we spend typically about a half of a day just on the blower door. The blower door is something that once you've done it a handful of times, it truly is muscle memory. But the first time you do it, it's incredibly intimidating for some people, and the training tends to work best in currently vacant homes if possible. Homes are obviously frequently occupied during the audits, but for the training, we're typically going through with 6 to 15 people, and we're all in somebody's living space. And it's a bit much for, the homeowner and to put them through that imposition. And it's also much easier for the trainees to set up and break down the blower door with no furniture. It adds, plenty of room for us to get in there, and everyone gets opportunities to really get comfortable using the equipment. And so there's basically a frame and a shroud, as you can see in the pictures. These blower doors are about $5,000. It's the biggest cost incurred for the audit training. It's about $9,000 total with equipment, if the combustion equipment's needed. If you live in a place that's all electric, then that can save probably about $2,000 for the combustion equipment. But of that $9,000, $5,000 is the blower door, and it's really robust piece of equipment. These things can get utilized for years really reliably. There is a digital manometer that's, it's a sensitive, it's an electronic piece with a touch screen. But aside from that, these doors can really handle some abuse. And if for some reason the shroud gets ripped, you can buy replacement shrouds. I think they're about $200. But these pics were taken at a recent training we did in November with a tribal college, their workforce development students, and their housing authority, sponsored by a capacity building grant from Tribal Energy Alternatives. And so I touched on this a bit earlier when we can make a house too tight. And so one of the learning objectives of the training, and we spend also a lot of time with the students on and make sure everyone understands, is learning how to take the measurement from that blower door. The blower door will give us a cubic feet per minute reading for the pressure difference from the inside and the outside of the house. And we take that number and we use the volume of the test home to be able to calculate the air changes per hour. Air changes per hour is the standard for air sealing and weatherization. And this allows us to standardize the measurement and also demonstrate the effectiveness of any retrofits completed as part of the initial audit. And it's important we do this because, you might have a very small CFM number on the blower door, and it could still be a very leaky house if you're in a really small house. And on the other end, you might have some pretty significant number on the blower door, but it could be a very well-sealed, larger home or building. So the building volume definitely plays a huge part in what that reading is on the blower door. The blower door measurement doesn't really mean much until we've calculated the air changes per hour. And, additionally, this is tremendous data to incorporate into a grant application. Particularly if you can demonstrate reducing air changes per hour from, say, just arbitrary numbers. Let's say you were able to reduce it from 25 to 17 or something like that. Being able to show that level of effectiveness with the measures taken adds a great deal of confidence to a competitive grant package to some institution to continue funding to complete more homes. And the last little bit on this I'll touch on is, again, we can make houses too airtight. There needs to be, we need probably a minimum of 3 to 5 air changes per hour to ensure that we have good air quality in a home for the resident. While we can rarely get homes this airtight, though, particularly older homes. And so if it does occur, there are ways that we can add ventilation. They've got window vents or there's wall vents. There's ways that we can add ventilation to ensure adequate airflow, but that's an incredibly rare situation, okay? Most homes are in the 11 to up range for air changes per hour, and we typically are able to drop them to a level fairly significant, but it's still above 5. So it's a very rare situation where we get a house so incredibly tight that we need to add additional ventilation to ensure proper indoor air quality. Is that the last slide on this one, Steph? One other thing I want to iterate, I guess, is the training itself. Steph and I don't show up and have like set curriculum that everybody needs to conform to. All the training curriculum is, it's all based on Building Performance Institute's principles, but it's specifically developed and catered to the unique situations that each tribe we work with. There's custom site-specific curriculum for each training effort, relating to who the attendees are, housing, workforce, tarot, local contractors, and I think Steph might get into this here when she goes through the audit process here next, but custom checklists and workbooks so they're able to document some of these findings to be able to use later for grants. Is there any questions? I know it's a lot of material and not a lot of time. Hmm.
All right, well, if there are any questions, again, keep typing them into the chat and we'll definitely pause and respond to them as we're moving along. So jumping into the auditing and reporting process, kind of what Mike was just talking about. When we teach this process, we put together custom workbooks for the tribe that we're working with. Typically it's a housing authority, sometimes it's a tribal college, sometimes we work with tarot and local contractors as well. But we try to customize those workbooks, to the local buildings, and oftentimes with housing, they've got specific, floor plans that they're working with and things like that. So we can use those as examples of how to go through the audit, because with some of the calculations, we do have to calculate square footage and volume and other pieces. So we do customize those workbooks. I'll also say that compared to what you would see with a certified auditor coming through, we try to really simplify the process so that you all can collect the data and use the data, but not necessarily, we're not certifying anybody. We're more, teaching you to use these tools so that you can go make impacts with your housing. So if folks want to go get certified, that's an additional step. And it's, I will say it's a very intense paperwork that is required if you're going that route, and doing work off res and things like that. But what we do is put together kind of a simplified process so that it feels digestible and accessible, for folks to do. We're not trying to add a ton of workload for folks. We're trying to, show you how to use this equipment and be able to go in, perform these audits, and be effective in, what you're recommending to folks and what you're improving on these units. So I'm going to talk through that process a little bit now. Again, it's most effective if you're able to do these audits before you make improvements and then after you make improvements, because showing that change is really going to show how effective your improvements are and help you go after grant funding. So we're going to walk through a few of those pieces now. So the first piece is we analyze energy bills, and this is something that happens before we even get started with the audit. So you're going to try to collect the last 12 months of bills from the homeowner. What that's going to do is give you a really good idea of how much energy they're consuming and what it's being used on. So this is a sample bill on the right there that just kind of shows that 12 months of usage and what the rates being charged are. We use that data again to figure out, so seasonal versus base load. So your seasonal usage is your heating and your cooling. Again, that tends to be 50% or more of your usage in a home. The base load is literally everything else. So everything else that's consuming energy in your house is your base load. That tends to be pretty consistent throughout the year. It's really your heating and cooling where you're going to see the fluctuations in some places that get really cold in the winter, you're going to see a lot higher bills maybe in the winter for heating than you do necessarily in the summer, where some folks don't even have cooling in place. But we go through those bills and we do this analysis before we even go into the unit, because this really gives us an idea of what we might be seeing when we go into the unit. It helps us see what that consumption is and what those usage patterns are before we've even stepped foot in, to see where the leakage is and what appliances they're using. And it really helps us identify if there's any customer information. So whoever the homeowner is, maybe we need to educate them on usage a little bit because we're seeing some patterns in there. So it really just gives us an idea up front of what's going on in the unit before we even step foot in the unit. And so kind of the process is that we get those 12 months of bills, we do a little bit of analysis, then we go in and do the site survey, the actual energy audit. And then we can use the information, from the bills, from the audit to kind of look and see the overall picture and make recommendations. So here you'll just see kind of the activity that we do with utility bills. So this is a real life case where we collected 12 months of bills. You can see here the 12 months of usage in kilowatt hours. And we use this to do some basic calculations of your base load, your seasonal load, that heating and cooling. And we kind of put together this plot here. So I'll talk through how to do those calculations, but you'll see in the plot that orange at the bottom, that's the base load. So that's a consistent number throughout the year. You'll see that in the summer, there's obviously some kind of cooling. It's probably just a fan usage there because it's not really high. It's definitely not an air conditioning unit. But then in the winter, you'll see these really high peaks. That's the heating load that you're seeing there. This is in Eastern Washington. So, really cold over there in the winter, and you're seeing a lot of heating usage there. But we do walk folks through, coming up with that base load is pretty straightforward. You can use the calculator on your phone to do this. You can use Google to do it. But basically, you're looking in that usage here for the 3 lowest months. I can see here, 894, 897, and 1028 look like my smallest 3 numbers. So I'm using those, I'm adding them together, dividing by 3 and multiplying by 12, and it's all written right there. But that's going to show me my base load calculation. And again, that's kind of what we're seeing as the constant, every month, no matter what, that's what your usage is based on the appliances that you've got running in the house. And then that seasonal load calculation, again, that's your heating and cooling. So that's everything that's not the base load. So you're going to add all of that usage for the 12 months together and subtract the base load. And that's going to give you what's left, which is your heating and cooling. So again, that just gives us a picture of how much of that energy is going toward heating and cooling, how much is going to that base load. Because again, if we're talking about maybe installing a mini split for heating and cooling, this is going to help us say, well, a mini split of X size is going to use this much energy. We already know how much energy our heating and cooling is using because we've just calculated it. And so you can come up with a estimated savings for a homeowner based on installing that heat pump. And again, when we do the heat pump training later this month, we'll go more into that, but this is kind of high level overview of what that looks like. And then this energy index calculation, again, kind of like those air changes per hour Mike was just talking about. This is a way of kind of standardizing kilowatt hours per square foot per year. And so it's regardless of the size of the house, you're able to kind of compare home to home what that usage looks like per square foot. So it doesn't really matter if it's a 5,000 square foot or a 500 square foot home. We're able to kind of standardize and use this energy index to say, how well insulated is this home, how many appliances are running, that sort of thing. And again, we can look at the base load versus the seasonal load to determine, kind of what's impacting that. And then effective cost per kilowatt hour is going to vary depending on where we are. So, we walk through those calculations depending on the bills being used, but that's really taking into account all of the fees that you're paying in addition to the cost per kilowatt hour. You might be in a place where you're paying based on peak hours. So maybe you're paying higher rates at different times during the day, but it factors in all of those pieces to kind of come up with an effective kilowatt hour usage cost. So maybe you live somewhere where, your bill says, oh, you're paying 8 cents per kilowatt hour, but, then you're paying a $50 fee on top of that. And, if you live off res, you're paying taxes on top of that. And so it's taking all of those costs into account and coming up with kind of an effective, how much does each kilowatt hour actually cost you at the end of the day? So again, this is really helpful for folks who are auditing. We also, go over this in our fundamentals course, just to, if there are general community members attending and want to better understand their bill and how to look at their usage patterns and make improvements, this is a really helpful activity for that, but definitely necessary for the auditing. And as you can see, if I were to do this, for the 12 months before the audit, after the audit, I'm probably going to see some significant improvements, if I've done some air sealing and weatherization. So this is just a really good tool for doing some basic math and saying, like, look at this improvement that we're seeing based on the audit that we did and the improvements that we made. Any questions there? No, math is always a little bit fun for folks. So back to potential energy savings opportunities. We've touched on this a bunch, but we'll just reiterate. You can see in that picture, that's one of those attic hatches that Mike was talking about. So again, a really simple solution is, even if you've got blown in insulation everywhere in the attic, if you just staple a fiberglass bat to the back of that hatch, you're gonna, seal off that so that you're not just creating that highway of heat flowing out of your home in the winter time. So that's a really simple fix that folks can do there. Air sealing tends to be kind of the cheapest option. I mean, it's not very costly. It's not, it's not going to take a ton of time to go do that air sealing, but it's really going to tighten up the space and have significant improvements for really low cost. Insulation can be a little bit more pricey depending on what types of insulation you're using. But again, that upfront investment of putting in the insulation and kind of sealing off those leakages is really going to make significant improvements in seeing that air stay in the home and, keeping the home warm in the winter and cool in the summer so that you're not paying as much for that heating and cooling. We touched on lighting and appliances. LED upgrades are great. You're not going to see significant savings. I think the bulbs are going to cost you more than what you're going to see in the savings, but it's an improvement you can make. Again, the appliances, if it's anything other than your heating, your cooling, and your water heating, we recommend, waiting for that appliance to fail before you're going and investing money in an Energy Star appliance. Unless a rebate's paying for it 100%, then by all means, go ahead and do that. Windows and doors are another great spot to improve, air sealing and insulation. Getting higher efficiency doors and windows means you're going to have less of that hot air leaking out, cold air, in the summer. So really maintaining that boundary so that you're keeping the house cool when you want it cool and warm when you want it warm. And again, the heat pumps are going to be a really huge saving, when it comes to heating and cooling, especially if you're, in an all electric environment. They also add, again, the comfort for the homeowner. There are a lot of places, I'm from Washington State, and, we didn't typically have air conditioning, the cooling in the homes. So a lot of older homes just don't have any cooling. If they do, they've got those box unit air conditioners that are not efficient at all and using a lot of energy. So these heat pumps are going to provide heating and cooling. And again, we'll have a later webinar on that, but they're very high efficiency, can really minimize the energy that you're using for that heating and cooling. And when you think about the fact that it's 50% or more of your load each month, you know, it's really worth the savings of decreasing that load. They're very efficient. Again, if you've got an open space, they're going to heat and cool that whole space really well. And using the fans, again, can really improve that too. Any questions?
Steph, while folks are thinking if they have questions, I might jump in for just a second here. So this picture, they did a really robust job of sealing this. As you can see, they built a box around so the insulation can be in place. There's silicone where they sealed around where they filled that form. And then you can see on the front of the panel, there's a small strip of weather stripping. And really, that's what we're looking for. Not necessarily to this extent, but at minimum, staple in a fiberglass bat to the back of the door, or you can glue foam board on there, just making sure that that door is insulated with some weather stripping as well, because that gap will definitely draw air through. And very similarly, there was an example earlier in the presentation where it had recessed can lights. Recessed can lights also contribute fairly significantly to that condition where your roof is not freezing up when the rest of it is and causing ice dams. And so recessed can lights will have an IC rating. And what that means is there's different fixtures. Some of them are already insulated properly to where it can come in contact with insulation. And so some of those, the blowing can be all over, you know, around and on the can light. And the ones that aren't, they still get pretty hot, and you can't have the insulation. It's a combustible issue where you can't have the insulation come in contact with the fixture. And it used to be a pain in the neck. You'd have to like build a box around it to put the box over it to properly seal it. Well, now you can buy in bulk. They sell these little cones from Amazon that you can just simply put a cone over top of the can light and the insulation can get blown in. Very easy and quick and relatively, you know, low cost remedies really will make a huge difference in your membership's bills.
All right, so we talked kind of up front, you know, when John asked the question about some of the available resources, but I'll just retouch on some of those again. List is not all inclusive, but we'll touch on some of the opportunities that are available for folks that are interested. So again, Mike and I both used to work for the Office of Indian Energy. That office does have planning grants as well as deployment grants available. And as far as we can tell, you know, things like heat pumps are absolutely eligible still for that funding, whereas things like renewable energy are still kind of up in the air until those grant opportunities come out. We'll see if they're able to kind of fight for that as well. But those planning and deployment grants are a great opportunity. We should see that coming out sometime in the spring this year. And that could be a really good opportunity for folks that are interested in this work. The technical assistance offered by Office of Indian Energy is absolutely free to tribes. If you go to the website, click on technical assistance, all it asks for is an email, and they can provide free technical assistance. Not necessarily all the feasibility work that you might need to do, but they can definitely do a fair amount of the upfront work on projects to help with that. So if there's any technical assistance you need, you know, feel free to reach out. And they've got a newsletter that comes out pretty regularly with really good opportunities as well. Mike also mentioned the BIA Office of the Department of Energy and Mineral Development grants available. Those can be really helpful for the pre-feasibility work as well. And those are no cost match, I believe. So that's a really good one to apply for. In terms of private funding, and again, this is not all inclusive, but folks that we work with regularly, Tribal Energy Alternatives, formerly Grid Alternatives, now they're an affiliate of Grid. They've got kind of 4 different opportunities that they offer. The Tribal Capacity Building Grant is one that we've worked with several folks on to not only offer these energy audits and purchase the kits for them, but other training and capacity building opportunities as well. So that's a really great one. They do have a planning grant for folks interested in strategic energy planning, and then a couple deployment grants as well, focused on solar. So if you've got projects that are ready to go, the GAP funding is really great for anybody who needs a match from federal or state dollars. And then Native Learning Center, super grateful again for this webinar series that they've let us offer. We've got a couple more webinars coming up at the end of the month, so check those out. Native Learning Center can also provide technical assistance. This is on a case-by-case, basis, but if you are interested in things like the energy audit training that we offer, they can provide that on-site training. They are limited to the training fees, so they cannot purchase the equipment. But again, you can apply for funds from T or other sources to pay for that equipment. In some cases, folks are able to use their Tarot office to pay for that equipment. But if you are interested, reach out and we can help you look for ways to fund it, because again, this is a really good training opportunity for your folks to really get to work doing this this effort and minimizing your energy consumption. We see it a lot in Indian country where people are applying for grants and then hiring contractors from the outside to come in and do the work. And we just really want to encourage folks to, look internally, train your own contractors, train your own housing folks, train your workforce development students to do this work. And, that'll move you closer to energy sovereignty. So anything to add, Mike?
No, I think that was great stuff. Thank you. I would mention that I think that the back to the resources we talked about earlier, John. I think that Office of Indian Energy is truly trying to fight for some of the residential and community renewable projects, and I think everybody understands that large scale is probably off the table with this administration. But if for some reason they're unsuccessful in their battle with that, they're still looking to have about $75 million in this spring available for funding, which is again a tremendous opportunity for heat pumps and some of the efficiency type work. The BIA grants they're significantly smaller, but still very effective. As Steph mentioned, those are they're no cost match. And so 100% funded by the feds. You have to go through kind of the timeline of getting a grant from the feds. It could put it sometimes close to a year out, depending on the cycles and the timing of it all. But I think the last EMDP just closed fairly recently, and I think they had $8.5 million. And then the TEDC grant is really powerful funding from them. It's always too small of a pot of money. I think the last one was somewhere around $3 million. I'm not sure on that, but I think that's pretty close to what it was. And, those tribes that funding initially started as tribes to pursue terras to be able to expedite permitting process. And tribes really seized the opportunity to make the market for that grant funding to be utilized as they look to, inform how they can regulate energy activities on the res and look to even form tribal utility authorities. And so many of those are desktop-based studies, and they can actually fund quite a lot of projects with a fairly small pot of money, but both of those are fairly competitive. And again, guys, our contact information is on the screen right now. We will be at the Seminole conference later this month if any of you plan to attend. If for some reason you have any question at all, please don't hesitate to give Steph or I a call or an email. We'd love to get on a call with you and chat about your specific situation. And if there are any questions, I think we still have a little bit of time to go through that. And really appreciate all your time today.
Yes, and thank you for all of the questions and engagement as well. We really appreciate it.
I can go ahead and just run through the outro. Folks, feel free to keep typing. Let them know your questions and your comments. Thank you for another fantastic presentation, Mike and Stephanie. This is such valuable information. If y'all want to show them some love in the feedback survey, I did put that link for you in the chat, and it's also in that shared notes section. We hope you can join us for the next webinar. That'll be this upcoming Tuesday. Mike and Stephanie have a full month of January with us. So this will be them again with solar model capacity building. So same time and same place. You could just log in like you did today, and you'll see that green banner at the top of the screen. 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. Jennifer, the link to the slides is in the shared notes section, as well as further up in the chat. And it is being recorded. I will post that tomorrow. And you can check out our other recorded webinars on our YouTube channel. We have a whole playlist called the Cathedra Webinar Archive. It goes back about 2 years. We hope you can check out our other upcoming training events. We post about them on our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And we have an in-house produced podcast, the Hopathanga Native American Podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. But otherwise, that is all we have for you today, folks. Thank you so much for tuning into the webinar. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and hope to see you back on Tuesday. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording, but thank you everybody who came today, and thank you, Mike and Stephanie.